Hello, and welcome to Nosotros, the podcast about Mexican-American politics, history, cultura, y más, brought to you in part by the Gomez Law Firm. I'm your host, Elaine Ayala, Metro columnist for the San Antonio Express News, and my guest today is Stacy Speedlin Gonzalez. She's a licensed professional counselor who holds a master's degree in clinical mental health and a doctorate in counseling and owns a thriving mental health practice called Salient Clinical Services. This week, I wrote about what mental health patients and their counselors are experiencing in this new Trump era, and posited that the nation is undergoing a new kind of PTSD, President Trump's stress disorder. My goal was to begin to understand how political issues and policy changes are affecting not only mental health, but the counselors who provide those services. Thanks for joining me, Stacy.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very big topic. But we'll start with a little lighthearted game I play with all my guests of this or that. Individual counseling or support groups?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Individual counseling.
Always. I'm just thinking about all those people who can't afford it and
Yes.
that a support group can help.
Absolutely. That's why it's hard for me to choose one or the other. Can I choose both?
You can choose both.
Then hands down, both.
Okay. Art as therapy or exercise as therapy?
Definitely art.
Tell us why.
Art therapy, in terms of our most recent research, is showing how when we listen to music or when we do anything creative, we're activating certain neurons that trigger childhood memories and other things. Oh. So when we think about therapy and we think about some of the areas that we're trying to unlock in our psyche, art therapy goes really well together with the healing processes that we're hoping for.
Oh, excellent. This one's a tough one. Being the bully or being bullied?
Ooh. I
always wonder, that we come to the defense of the bullied right away. Mm-hmm. Children who are undergoing this, people who are undergoing this in the workplace and other places. But then the problem of the bully and that person's problems.
Well, we cannot assume that every bully has been bullied. There are people out there who I think for various reasons feel entitled to harm other people. And that may not be because they were victims themselves. I suppose I would want to reframe the question to punching up or punching down. My team and I talk a lot about how when you discuss things like social justice and advocacy, there is not necessarily bullying that takes place, but some of us have to punch upward, meaning we fight certain systems and certain constructs within our community and within our society that injure people. But that level of advocacy, while sometimes deemed aggressive, has its value. So I would say when choosing between punching up or punching down, definitely punching up.
Excellent. Emotional support or medicinal support? And the latter as, antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication.
They both work really beautifully in conjunction with one another. It just depends on what one's needs are.
Okay. The couch or the armchair? That's a personal one because I want to know how you work.
Oh, I'm a couch gal. I fall asleep on the couch every night watching Netflix.
Okay, all right. But in your practice, are you armchair? Are you do you like your patients to be couch or are they also armchair?
My clients always sit on the couch. And there are 2 couches in my office. They get to choose what view they want. I always sit in the armchair.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. This is a silly one. Dr. Phil or Judge Judy?
Oh, Judge Judy.
Right?
Yes.
Dr. Phil, come on. Send him back. Sent him back. Okay. Thank you, Stacy. I knew that was a little hard for you, but we'll get into some questions now.
Okay.
Earlier this week, I talked with you and others about what counselors are seeing in their practices and how political discourse has created divisions between patients and their relatives, maybe, and sometimes leading to breakups in those, or pauses at least, in those relationships. Tell us what you're seeing.
This is definitely not the first time that we've seen it. I think in the previous administrations, there were problems and challenges within family structures and family constellations, especially when you're talking about families that have opposing political views, opposing worldviews about things like immigration or anything, abortion. I mean, there are so many different subject matters where families feel very divided. And these are extremely hot button topics because what we're really talking about at a basic level is this idea that some people have rights or should have rights and others should not. There's been a lot of devaluing of humanity and human experiences through politics. And that places families and relationships in a very fractured place when individuals feel forced to choose whether they are going to support themselves, their ideologies, their needs, and their own rights, or whether they can accept a person who claims to love them, who has very opposing views.
Look, for example, someone who says anti-transgender slogans or politics, right? Or someone who says, no one should have the right to an abortion.
Correct. Yes. Those very subject matters are exactly what I'm referring to. And so it becomes a deep level of cognitive dissonance that people are having trouble reconciling. Because to engage with family members who have such strong belief systems that are juxtaposed of your own can cause a level of dissonance and disassociation. And when we lose
What do you mean? Break those two words up for people.
Absolutely.
Dissonance and disassociation.
So cognitive dissonance often occurs when we have very opposing thoughts that collide with one another. This idea of, I love my aunt, but my aunt voted against my better interests. And so how do we reconcile those two views when I don't feel safe in my community, I don't feel safe with some of the policies that are happening, and yet I have this aunt that tells me they love me, but they are absolutely in support of the very policies and the very belief systems that go against who I am and my very existence. That cognitive dissonance is the idea that these two thoughts cannot hold together at the same time.
How can your aunt love you?
That's the problem. That is the crisis that people are experiencing within their family systems. And this idea of disassociation is when we can no longer show up in relationships authentically and as ourselves. So we start showing up in an inauthentic way. We keep certain aspects about ourselves and about our existence out of the relationship to maintain the integrity of the relationship. And when that occurs, we find individuals feeling isolated within the context of the relationship itself.
And to a certain extent, we've always had these kinds of issues before us. It's that when you think of that Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner where you're just kind of not mentioning the very topic that's, your Theo is talking about, and you're not going to have an argument about it over dinner. But is it more pronounced these days?
Absolutely. Simply because politics have become so binary that people take a stance and they're very vocal about it. Even to the extent that there is some level of pride that people are taking in antagonizing others with their politics. And I feel that that is what's besetting every family and every family system, where you can't go to the dinner table anymore without someone picking on you and taking joy in the action. And that is so harmful. That is to me, when I think about the thing that causes the most injury to my clients, the things that they're talking about, is the fact that there are family members that take joy in watching them be afraid, in watching them be sad, and relish in the idea that people that they profess to love are going to lose very important rights and very important provisions that make their life sustainable.
You, in the story that I did this week, you mentioned that familial breakups may not be the biggest issue, that the even bigger problem that both your patients and fellow counselors are facing in this second Trump administration is the fear, the terror that we're experiencing about mass deportations or major cuts to programs on which we depend. Talk about that a little bit and how you've seen it come to light in your practice and among your clients.
So many different things. We do have clients that are losing their jobs, federal workers. We have clients who are very reliant on certain social resources, community-based resources, and they've been made aware that the length of time that those resources will exist is a very, very short, very finite amount of time should they lose their federal funding. We are aware that there are family members who are reliant on individuals within their family system who may get deported, who are primary breadwinners. So the list goes on and on and on. And with the counseling community, within the context of our own profession, I was actually, I was on a meeting today, as a matter of fact, where I was presenting results from a 3-year longitudinal study that I had done with a colleague of mine from Trinity University, where we were talking about health disparities within the LGBTQ community. And I was presenting that results to several clinicians within the San Antonio area. And I'm presenting all of this evidence. And there are things that are coming out of the evidence that are not unbeknownst to our community. The fact that there are health disparities, there are health inequities very specific to that population. And as I'm going through the recommendations section, I just see all these puzzling looks. And I knew what was coming. And sure enough, hands started to raise, and they're like, Dr. Speedlin, if all of these things are true, how do we address those now when all of these executive orders are coming through the pipeline, there's threats against DEI, there's all of these hot button topics that are losing funding, are losing all kinds of financial and fiscal tractions. How do we help when everything that you're saying we need to do is not possible today? And that is not an answer that any of us have. And when clients are coming to my practice and they're talking about these concerns at a very core personal level, experiential level, like they are going through this, we don't have answers. And so
How frustrating is that?
Oh, it is. We are building the plane while flying. And this concept of social justice and advocacy has to exist for us now outside the scope of our practice, right? Because you can't solve the problems that your clients have within the context of your couch.
No, and every day is another executive order that could impact the very people you're serving, because it could be Medicaid cuts so broad, so damaging that you can no longer serve that client.
Correct.
It is mind-boggling. You talk about these familial breaks among your clients. I wonder if you have any personal experience too.
I do. As a matter of fact, I have family members who have voted across the spectrum, and I absolutely understand what my clients are going through. And I understand the challenges that each person has to face when it comes to making very complex decisions about what is best for their own mental health and what is best for their own peace of mind. It is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, what you need to give you peace of mind may be one of the most challenging things you have to do culturally. or humanitarian. You know, we are all built with this need for connection, this desire for connection. But what's happening now, more so than any other time in our history, is this idea of having to really re-examine the harmful impacts of connection. That while human beings might be biologically hardwired for connection, it might be essential to our growth and development as well as to our mental health. There is a double-edged sword that exists as well that says that sometimes connection itself can be so harmful, it is in our better interest to sever those ties for senses of safety.
And that is so hard. It affects people for generations. Yeah. Or it can affect people for generations.
Definitely. And for your audience, I want to say there is no right answer. I think people are looking to social media, they're looking to various avenues to decide, what do I do when I'm dealing with a family member who takes joy in harming me, or votes against my better interest, or makes fun of me at the dinner table, or says very derogatory things about who I am and how I identify. And there is no right answer for all people. You have to figure out what works for you, understanding and weighing both sides of the equation and figuring out what works best for you in light of what you need.
You mentioned something that was fascinating to me, that counselors have developed these, I don't know if you call them bulletin boards, or places where they're gathering online to discuss the challenges ahead. Give us insight into what you're hearing and how you're all making your way in this new era.
So there is a concept in the research. It's more strategically placed in medical research, specifically with nurses. We also see it with veterans and other first responders. And it's a concept called moral injury. And I'll break that down for your audience. Moral injury occurs within the context of a professional setting when the mission, the vision, or the policies that specific profession or field or agency requires of you that lies outside the scope of your own moral development. That's when moral injury occurs. It happens sometimes with veterans who may not believe in murder, but have to sometimes end a life. It happens with first responders who might have to save someone who just engaged in a mass shooting. And within the context of my profession, it's happening now more than ever, because we find counselors are working for agencies that are seeking to save the agency, and in doing so, they've let go of very important policies that protect vulnerable populations. And vulnerable populations and advocacy and respect for differences is the very core of who counselors are.
Are you talking about DEI?
Mm-hmm.
Explain how how so many organizations, the federal government for sure, and state governments, universities are getting rid of their diversity, equity, and what's the last one?
Inclusion.
And it's really at the core of counseling, isn't it?
It is. And please understand, we've taken this subject matter out of context. And that's been the problem. It's really been the problem all along. I mean, it began with this concept of critical race theory, this idea that we shouldn't be teaching critical race theory to grade school kids and elementary kids. Please understand that critical race theory is a legal term. It is a form of legal scholarship that is taught to lawyers in law school. It's never been in
schools, yes.
No, it's in law school, where it should be, where people who are trying to understand the law should gain a better perspective about how the history of the law has been influenced by institutional racism. That's where it belongs. And so when we talk about these concepts of DEI, DEI has historically been a lens, a conceptual framework that helped places of business, large industries, major organizations conceptualize the idea that differences are valuable, because too often individuals who have been diverse have come to the table, and what they've been expected to do was essentially assimilate to the majority population, so that what they had to bring to the table was completely sterilized. And so we wanted to move away from that with this idea of no, when we bring diverse thoughts, diverse experiences, and diverse backgrounds to the table, what we do is we then have a diverse target, a diverse market. The only way we can be of maximum service to anyone that we provide to, we have to have a maximum lens. If it's all very microscopic, then there's only a small target that we truly reach and make an impact on. So we want to hire, we want to retain the most talented of individuals who happen to come from diverse backgrounds. Not this idea that diversity somehow substitutes for talent. No, it is talent and diversity in one, as opposed to what we've done in the past, where we tend to hire people that look like us, that make us feel more comfortable, the friend of ours, the roommate from college, or my cousin's, aunt's, uncle's former roommate who needs a job. So now we're moving away from that. So I wanted to showcase that before I answered your question.
Yes. Okay. So counselors are gathering.
Yes.
In the universe somehow. What are they talking about? What are they sharing with one another?
The fact that our work, for the first time in a very long time, feels very saturated with problems that we have no solutions to. The fact that people are coming in with legitimate fears. So
fear of deportation or fear of not being able to afford rent or whatever it is.
Or losing their jobs, or possibly not being able to maintain their marriage, that their marriage may one day
be dissolved.
Yes.
Because marriage equity is on.
Or that you cannot get an abortion ever again. Because, let's be honest, people travel for abortion. Or the idea that marriage will essentially become at fault, meaning it's going to be more complicated to get a divorce. You're going to have to shore up proof that you deserve that divorce. There's so many policies that have been discussed and have been showcased that frighten people.
Yeah, I think women are frightened in very legitimate ways about the fewer rights that they may enjoy. We already see it. I mean, there are people in my family who are 5 and 10 and that are girls certainly have fewer rights than we did 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Sure.
These counselors that are gathering, they're gathering, is this online mostly? How are they gathering?
Every forum that's possible. And, counselors are like any other population. The younger ones are much more into social media forums like TikTok, formulating groups on Facebook, social media like Instagram. It really just depends on how people choose to gather. Some of it is by consult and phone call. I mentioned about the research that I was talking about earlier, and the conversation diverted just because there were enough of us in the room to start talking about it. And I actually said, when the person asked the question of me, I said, I'm going to be candid. I don't have all the answers. I invite any of you to chime in. What are you doing? What works for you? And I was met with a lot of silence. And that's because the fact is, we still feel insecure about what level of skill we have to combat this issue. And that's because we've never seen anything like it. Not at the level that we're seeing it, not at the saturation level.
There was the recent coronavirus pandemic gave us another glimpse into counseling. And I know that you help counsel nurses who are dealing with COVID in a very personal way. And I wonder how that situation might translate into what we're experiencing now. Is there a parallel here?
Definitely. There is a parallel process. A lot of the nurses during COVID-19 would talk about the fact that for the first time in their career, they were dealing with a disease that they did not know how to treat. There was no treatment for it for a very long time, right? We had the vaccine at some point, but for a very long time.
We were just watching people die.
We were just watching them go on a ventilator and watching them die. And you can't say anything to them. You just have to say, we're going to do the best we can to keep you alive. And there was no
And they weren't
protocol.
Near any of their loved ones. They had to do it alone.
Precisely.
I found it fascinating that you used that example to illustrate what counselors are feeling now.
It's a helpless feeling. It really is. It's a helpless feeling, and there is a parallel process that exists. Just like the nurses who were treating people with COVID, they were afraid of getting it. They were afraid of bringing it home to their families. So they were in real time experiencing the very fears that these family members and these patients were going through. And that's what's happening to us. We are not distant from it. We don't have some form of survivor privilege, like back when I used to get deployed out to makeshift shelters after the hurricane, where I was not displaced like the individuals I was caring for. In this case, we are going through it the same time that our society is experiencing it. And some of the very fears that they have, we have. We actually do live outside of our office spaces. So living in our human society, we are exposed to the very traumas and the very fears that people have.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. There are so many different kinds. And I know that you've helped people experiencing PTSD. What is your best advice for someone who feels that they're in the middle of this new PTSD?
For anyone who is struggling with what's going on in our world, I encourage you to seek help. I don't think it's something that can be resolved all on its own. And one of the most challenging things about what the world is going through, what our nation is going through, is the fact that we haven't gotten on the other side of it. You know, when you're exposed to a trauma, and I'm going to use a different analogy, when you have a battered woman who's experiencing abuse at home, it is almost impossible to heal from the impact of that abuse while you're being abused. And so we are going through this right now, and it is so hard to heal because every time people feel that they're moving forward, it feels like the next day takes them back.
With every new executive order.
With every new experience that's happening in our nation right now, people feel that they are constantly being moved back and moved back and moved back, and they're afraid. And so I encourage people to seek help. And yes, you're hearing me say that we feel powerless. You're hearing me say that there's a lot to be desired when it comes to new territory and nuances for our clinical world, but we are learning and evolving along with our clients. That is what we do.
And I have to say that one analogy you used about flying, flying a plane while you're, what was it again?
While we're building it.
While we're building it. Just is so vivid to me. And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you so much for being here, Stacy. I'm sure we can't answer all the questions, but we have plenty of the former. You can watch video versions of Nosotros on YouTube and listen to it anywhere you get your podcast. My Metro column appears every Wednesday and Friday in the San Antonio Express News, and you can reach me via email at eayala@express-news.net. Thanks for listening, and join us next time on Nosotros.